I'm very pleased to be joined by three leading practitioners of public relations and strategic communications. Ruth Sarfati is Vice President of Corporate Communications at AOL. Prior to that was a partner at Dan Clores Communications, headed PR at Radio City and Barnard College, and spent 10 years at Howard Rubenstein Associates. It's there she came to know our second guest. Lloyd Kaplan is the chairman of Linden, Alschuler, and Kaplan Public Relations. Prior to forming his own firm, Lloyd was Executive Vice President at Rubenstein Associates, Deputy State Housing Commissioner, Chief of Staff for First Deputy Mayor John Zuccotti, and Special Assistant to Mayor Abe Beame. Our third guest is Matthew Hiltzik, President and CEO of Freud Communications. They're a strategic communications firm whose clients include several entertainment and media companies. Matthew currently serves as Katie Couric's spokesperson and was previously head of corporate communications and government relations at Miramax Films. Welcome to Citywide. That is the longest introduction we've ever had to give guests on this show, but I guess you're in the public relations building, so you want the public to know what it is that you do. So thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask a question. I'd like you each to answer it, but I'm going to ask Lloyd to kick off. Put yourself in the shoes of Howard Rubenstein, your former colleague.
It's done. Okay.
Longtime publicist and confidant to Rupert Murdoch and the New York Post. You're sitting in your office one day and you get a call from the Daily News looking for a comment on a story that a billionaire has accused a Page Six freelancer of trying to shake him down. What's the first thing that goes through your mind?
Oh my God. Here we go again. Well, Howard is terrific and kind of understands that life happens and events happen and a variety of surprises occur daily. So I don't think he'd be at all shaken by the question. You've got to deal with the issues, find out what's going on. I suspect his first reaction is to try to find out everything he can from the reporter about what the reporter knows, what the reporter thinks are the issues, in order to find out how to deal with them. And you deal with them, and I learned from Howard, basically truthfully. And it is clearly you don't run around exposing your throat, but what you do is make sure that you've got an answer that reflects your client's views, your client's needs, but that is also within those four corners of what actually happened. And in this particular case, I suspect you'd start to look and find out, well, who was the reporter and what was their relationship to the organization, to the Post, and was the Post aware of whatever it was that was going on or not, and to begin to try to find out how you can make an appropriate separation, if possible.
Is the firestorm coming?
Well, I think that considering over the years the things that Howard has dealt with, I'm sure he just sort of viewed this as another day in his life. Is obviously he's someone who has set the standard in New York for publicity for a really long time and being able to handle these type of things. I think the most important thing is to immediately separate fact from fiction and be able to understand what the top priorities are in protecting your client. In this particular case, one of my current clients and my former employer at Miramax was mentioned in reference to the story peripherally, and so I was very keenly aware of Howard's response to it, and I think the issue is really to focus on the facts, and in this case they were out there, the story passed, and hopefully not to be heard from again, although who knows how that will happen. I think the most important thing really is to make sure that your client's top priorities are protected and that you are providing as much truthful information to combat a lot of the misinformation, especially in a case like this where there were sort of bits and pieces, and when you're dealing with excerpts, there's always a question about what is the whole story, and I think trying to get as close to the whole story is the best way of approaching it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to Howard Rubenstein, who is a person I admire enormously, publicly he's a man of very few words. I mean, you'll notice his statements are never very long. He feels he'll always respond, but it's very brief and to the point. And he's an attorney by training, so I think his instinct is, as Lloyd pointed out, to find all the facts out and sort of understand what the issues are. he's a very quiet representative, I think, and you know, Howard is the lean-in kind of guy, so you know, he'll always kind of speak very quietly and sort of figure out what the issue is, and then come to a conclusion. So I can't disagree with anything anybody said.
When you represent a public company and you have a crisis situation like this, how much of the response is driven by the communications people, and how much of the response is driven by the lawyers?
Oh, well, I would say by lawyers as well as by analysts, that is internal Wall Street analysts, those represent the investment interests. I would say it's a dual process, depending upon the company, of course. At AOL, there's a tremendous amount of dialogue between the corporate communications people, my department, and and the folks upstairs, that is a Time Warner. So I would say it's very much in concert.
I think one of the things
just
good one.
You said jump in, so
Just jump in.
I wanted to, you know, obey what you indicated earlier. I mean, that issue comes up quite often in our practice, and it's very clear, at least in my mind, that PR serves legal, not the other way around.
Well, a lot of times the issues aren't legal necessarily. Well, I mean, it could be legal,
Right.
but many times they're not legal. They're other kinds of things.
Well, you take the situation with Martha Stewart. If she didn't say anything, her stock price was going to get battered. If she said something, she ran the risk of being called to account for it by the federal prosecutor. So she was sort of in a no-win situation, unless the story that she had to tell was so clearly in the right that nobody could be mad at her for telling
Well,
it.
there's also use of, I mean, I also have I'm a lawyer actually by training as well, so I very much appreciate that fact-based approach, but there's always different ways to convey information, that there are third parties that can validate your argument or your perspective, and that's something that I think can be utilized, but a lot of the time that also requires additional research, additional legwork, and I think what separates people in the PR professional area is those that are willing to go the extra step to think about alternative ways to get a message out there, even if the principle is restrained for one reason or another, whether it be legally or something else.
Matthew, a lot of the work that you do has been in the entertainment arena, and sometimes their naughty is what's nice. In other words, controversy or a bad reputation is what's going to raise the visibility of a project or of an individual. How do you manage that process to keep it from getting out of control?
I hope you're not suggesting that Miramax or the Weinsteins ever used controversy as a way to raise the awareness of a film or anything. That would never happen. Fahrenheit 9/11 or any other movie, there's never ever happened. I think overall the main thing is it all goes down to the core of understanding what your client is and what their priorities are. It really does come back to that. And I think in selling a film or in selling a project, if it's something that's going to capture the public's imagination, it's going to be out there for the public to evaluate. Is the controversy one that's legitimate, that makes it more appealing, or one that sort of leaves you holding your nose and wanting to walk away? And so when you have films where it was almost like on a regular basis, the Catholic League would be criticizing Miramax movies, and
Did you
without
arrange
even
that?
seeing it. No, I mean, there was one time I had a great thing. I loved it. It was,
You don't have to.
William
Yeah,
Donahue, it was
right.
great. It was like a great pal, and because he would be called about something, and 40 Days, 40 Nights was one movie, and he went after that. But over the years, it really depends on the type of thing. We're working on a film like Magdalene's Sisters, which dealt with the way that the Irish Church treated young women. That was something where I think that captured people's interest in wanting to know this story. Or a film like Rabbit Proof Fence. These are independent films, and so it was a little narrower, but there was ways to, in that case, was about how Aborigine girls were treated in Australia. Also,
But that's not exactly page 6 fodder.
no, I
let's
understand,
face
but but I think in terms of that's an interest. It's a controversy in those countries. I never thought I'd be quoted in an Australian newspaper going against the minister in Australia trying to deny it, or a film like Ararat with the Armenian genocide. That was something where I never knew how big of an issue in the Turkish community, that they were very upset about that and the intensity of it. And there's ways to do it in a positive way, where even understanding other things that are going on in the city or the world. We did a press conference with several city council members a couple of years ago with the film Dirty Pretty Things, that dealt with sort of undocumented immigrants and others in London, and their trouble in terms of language barriers in hospitals and their fear of being deported. And that was an issue actually being debated in the city council with the mayor, and city council members met with the director, did a press conference and actually use that as an opportunity. So I think that's where it was constructive controversy.
But I would say that when you're representing an entertainment property, this is just based on my experience, there's a little more of a relaxed attitude about what the client will stand for, will tolerate in the press than when you're representing or when you're part of a company like Time Warner or another entity, or it's just not worth the risk.
Well, we learned that very much with Fahrenheit 9/11
Yeah.
because Miramax was owned by Disney. And so that was the primary example of
Right.
the parent company really having no interest in having a project that was going to create any controversy or additional agita or grief for them. And so ultimately the Weinsteins were able to arrange to have it distributed separately, but at the cost of a lot of ink for both sides, and it certainly didn't
But in
hurt
the
the
end,
box
it
office.
benefited.
Yes.
But there's a reality factor, I suspect, which is that these were impressive, interesting, creative, and controversial movies. This wasn't an add-on. One didn't have to arrange controversy. This was an artistic expression and a particular intellectual point of view or political point of view.
But you could arrange the controversy if you wanted to.
Yeah, that I kind of think that happens, in my experience, very rarely.
My lips are sealed over.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think that happens
I'll
more
leave
than
that one alone.
Listen, going back maybe 25 years, we used to represent, at Howard's, we represented a guy named Morris Katz, who was a painter. Do you remember Morris?
World's fastest painter.
World's fastest painter. He used toilet paper and a palette knife, and he was a Catskill mainstay. And Morris always, every summer, arranged to have his truck stolen, so that there'd be a huge story in the New York Post. It happened at least twice while I was representing Morris. I don't know how it happened.
Did the reporter ever ask you? He said,
Why,
that
no.
guy, how did that guy arrange to have his truck stolen again?
It just sort of happened. I'm sure he didn't, really arrange it. He just sort of allowed it to parked it in the wrong place. I don't know.
Sometimes these things happen. Citywide will continue right after this.
Mrs. Johnson, good to see you again. This is Mike. You can trust him. He looks just like you.
I'll be sucking up to you in order to make you sign the loan.
So, here are your low monthly payments and interest rate as we promised. Here's where they triple. The rest of this is really just here so that we get your house when you can't pay us back.
Such a lovely house.
Predatory lenders are never this easy to spot. Call us and protect yourself with the facts.
We're speaking with Ruth Sarfati from AOL, Lloyd Kaplan from Linden, Alschuler and Kaplan Public Relations, and Matthew Hiltzig of Freud Communications. Ruth, you spend a lot of your time trying to build a positive image for AOL. It's not so much about crisis management, but it's about increasing product awareness and how people relate to the products that AOL sell. Is it hard to do that, and how do you deal with it on an international basis where you have problems as mundane as getting your press releases translated into the local language, but also the local cultural taboos?
Well, the truth is my responsibilities are really domestic, though AOL has recently changed its name from America Online to AOL, anticipating a much more global image and reach. We do have presence in 3 other countries, and we're obviously well known around the world, but the UK, France, and Germany are the 3 other countries where we currently have offerings. As far as the reputation is concerned, my role is really to promote the offerings on AOL on the service. So it's almost like a magazine in the sense that there's an editorial well, and then there's an advertising component, and that's sort of my role. So it's to promote everything from music, in the case of Live Aid or the Dave Matthews concert that we did in New York a couple of years ago, to money and finance, to elections and news, to just about anything that we have, as well as email and the other functionality that we offer. Is it a challenge? Yes. And the environment has its own sort of rhythm, and there are times where there's only so much you can do, but we plug away, and that's the role we play.
This has become a very big business, but Matthew, how do clients value the services? How can they tell if they're getting their money's worth out of a communications consultant?
I think the relationship with each client has to be sort of evaluated on its own. At certain times there could be a crisis that the financial repercussions to a client could be so significant that even short-term assistance can be worth many multiples of what you might be charging them. In other cases, you can have a client who is one that's starting to evolve a little bit and get out into the public's eye, and the fact that you're helping them to build that initial public persona is really important as they develop their reputation and position themselves in the market. So it could just be 3 or 4 positive stories all of a sudden put them in a position to be making an agreement. We have one of our clients, speaking of the international component, is a Jordanian production company that is started by women. It does non-political, non-religious educational programming for kids in the Middle East, and we're doing an event with them, and one of the projects they're promoting is called Benanizi. It's one about kids, American kid and an Arab kid. Well, they are looking for distribution, they're looking for partners, and they're looking for financing, and so that's where we were able to recently get a piece in the Arts and Leisure section of the New York Times discussing the project, and now all of a sudden there's attention being paid to it by different distributors and others who now are much more aware of it than they may have been before when they were just sort of quietly seeking distributors. And then in that case, if it actually allows the project to go forward on the scope that they were looking for, then it's obviously a tremendous value. In other cases, I think it's the day-to-day help that you may provide, or specific really needs that could vary depending on the client.
Lloyd, I think the layperson thinks of what you do as being the spokesperson for your client, but in many instances you're actually acting almost as the leg man for the reporter in trying to get the facts for the reporter. Can you talk a little bit about those different roles and sometimes the tension that it creates?
Well, there is a sense that what you're there to do, again, is serve your client's needs, understand what those are, and that kind of tends to identify the role in each particular instance. I think one that you and I had some experience in involved Greenwood Cemetery. And if you recall, the statue of Minerva has a clear view of the Statue of Liberty, and kind of she was built so that that view would kind of symbolize kind of the sense of America, the American Revolution. The Battle of Brooklyn was fought there. And the developer wanted to put up a building that would, intercede and block that view. We talked about that, and it was clear that there was kind of an interesting story in how do you find the right reporter to tell that story. And we reached out to the Times and spoke to Glenn Collins, who's a sensational journalist and just has a feel for this kind of thing. He was interested in the story. He spoke to the client, he spoke to the developer, and that kind of triggered a focus on the issue that would not have been there without the kind of someone representing the public interest, in essence. And when I look at it, that's what I think Glenn did. And the developer then, who didn't have to really pay attention to the public interest, because if no one knows about it, it doesn't exist. He projected it, and then it was something he had to contend with, and it appears that that issue will be resolved positively.
What do you do in a situation where the reporter is pressing you to get some information from the client that maybe the client doesn't want to release, but you think that you're going to get a better break from the paper if you cooperate with the reporter? How do you convince the client to give up things that maybe the client isn't quite comfortable talking about?
Well, it's interesting. It just happened yesterday, as a matter of fact. Again, going back to, you've got to believe it is in the client's interest to reveal that information. Now, the client may not think so, but you can't, it's always going to be in your individual interest in terms of relationship with the reporter to tell the reporter everything. Well, if that was the case, then no one needs you. I mean, your job is to find a way to be responsive, to be responsible, but to provide the information in a way that will serve the client's needs. Now, without going into too many of the particulars, it was an environmental issue, and the client felt that just didn't want to talk about it. And I suggested that, look, this is the kind of issue, you've done a terrific job. You've done great remediation here. We ought to be proud of this. We ought to tell them, because if we don't define the issue, someone else is going to. And therefore, you ought to go and talk to the reporter and take him through it, let him know what you've done, and then sit back and let's see what happens.
I think there's almost three factors that go into that. One is that you can either argue that it's a missed opportunity, and so if you don't do it, you may regret having not receiving that same platform again later. The second would be that if you don't cooperate, then exactly as you were saying, that someone else will, and it potentially could be very negative. I think the third factor is just what the client's appetite is to receive the negative story or whatever negativity may go along with holding it back, so that if they're okay with that, then that's fine. As long as, I think it's the duty of the PR professional to make it clear, look, these are what the likely repercussions are, here's the probable worst case scenario. It may not even be that bad, but this is what could happen. Is that okay with you? Is that something that you're willing to live with? And if they are, then that's good. It may be that the client forgets that the next day after the story comes out and you do it that way, but you can only do your best to remind them.
Are the reporters lazy?
Oh, well, I would never say that, but
Not if you want to have lunch in this town again.
but you know, many times the more information you can provide as a PR person, the better. But I think you have to be careful. I was going to say to the other question that when you're in-house, a lot of times the executives that you're dealing with, and even the PR folks can drink the Kool-Aid, as it were, and begin to believe too much of your own internal hype and not be able to really anticipate what the tough issues are going to be. And I think it behooves us to remain removed enough to see the issues and help the reporter by preparing your executives. And it's a two-way thing. You know, you have to...
You know, there's a...
Yeah.
I'm sure we've all heard a client say, well, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, there's the saying that there's no bad publicity as long as you spell my name right.
I'm not sure
Yeah, I don't know
that's
about that.
accurate.
Yeah, I don't agree with that.
I don't agree with it. But
We've all been too
but the
close
client
to
who's and it believes that, you know, it's a free country. I don't have to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. Well, then you've got to address the fact that, look, no one says you want to talk about it. That's not the issue.
So there's also even distinguishing whether you want to talk about it on the record or on background, because at
Right,
least
and-
I think it's irresponsible and you sort of lose your right to ever complain about a story if you don't at least respond to the reporter and ask what it is. And because otherwise, that's the number one thing, to not have surprises and to at least know what the issues were, be meticulous about trying to give the reporter as many answers as possible. And the other thing is that if you don't know the answer, to say you don't know rather than speculating.
And it's also a two-way street. When you respond to a reporter, you learn. I mean,
Right.
reporter is also a source of information. And there's this kind of trading that goes on because a reporter will know more than he may initially say, and as you talk to him, you'll find out more. And that will provide other avenues for response and probably help you turn the story around.
That happens, I think, as you're representing a client over time also, and you begin to develop relationships with a reporter, they'll, both you and the reporter develop a rapport so that you can learn from them and they from you in turn. But executives, too, become more savvy and sophisticated. They know when to say, well, this is on background or this is off the record. Sometimes it gets a little out of control, you know, because they're, they're a little bit too...
They're having fun shifting gears that way, right?
Yeah.
I found that off the record and on background, while it is... basically, I tell a client, don't say anything you don't want to appear
in
on
print.
page one of the
Right.
Times, whether it's
always
couched in off the record or
always a good
background
policy.
or not.
Well, thank you for a peek behind the curtain so we can see the comments that you made that'll be on the front page of all the newspapers, I'm sure, after this show is broadcast. My thanks to Matthew Hiltzig, President and CEO of Freud Communications, Lloyd Kaplan, Chairman of Linden, Alschuler and Kaplan Public Relations, and Ruth Sarfati, Vice President of Corporate Communications at AOL. I'm Ken Fisher, and thank you for joining us.